What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Sleep When I'm Dead Book Club author interview with Laurie Elizabeth Flynn. Thank you so much for joining us. I also have my co-host Jules as well as Angie. Jules, do you want to do a small introduction about who you are, and then we'll go to Angie, and then we will let the author introduce herself.
Sure. My name's Jules, and my YouTube channel is Jules Books and Things. And yeah, I just kind of read a variety of all genres, and I am very excited for my first author interview and co-host with you this month.
I'm Angie, and my YouTube channel is Book Mama, and I also read a variety of genres and things like that, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so my name is Jessie. This is my book club. I do a different new release thriller book each month, and I'm so excited that we are reading Till Death Do Us Part. And also we have the author herself. Thank you so much. Laurie, do you want to let us know who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm Laurie. I've written Till Death Do Us Part is my fifth novel, my second adult novel. I've written 3 novels for young adults, and then I wrote my first adult novel, The Girls Are Also Nice Here, and followed that up with Till Death Do Us Part, which released in August. And I'm Canadian. I live in London, Ontario, and I live with my husband and our 4 kids in our very loud house.
Awesome. Well, we are excited to, have you here. We're going to go ahead and just start with the questions. I will start that off. What are you currently reading, or what was your last 5-star read?
Yes, I love talking anything about what I'm reading or what I've read. So I've actually had such a great reading month this month. I just finished a book called Sweet Fury by Sash Bischoff. I might be mispronouncing her name, but it just came out at the beginning of the month, and it's really, really twisty and beautifully written. So highly recommend. And then I'm also just tearing through The Favorites by Lane Fargo. That one also just came out. I think it came out a week ago, and it's set in the world of competitive ice dancing. So it's got like a Daisy Jones and the Six vibe. It's so good, and I'm like dying to get back into it tonight and read some more. But I'd say those are both going to be 5-star reads for me. So highly recommend both, and they both just came out. So it's I just love getting to talk about new releases, and yeah, they're just great.
Nice. So my question is, we'll of course discuss Till Death Do Us Part, but with this book being centered around wine, what types of wine do you prefer?
Oh gosh, love that question.
Assuming you drink wine.
Yes,
you wrote a lot about it.
I definitely drink wine, and I love to try different kinds of wine. I'm not like exceptionally picky, but I really love Prosecco or any sort of sparkling wine that isn't too sweet. I also really love Pinot Grigio. That's probably like my go-to, like white wine, a nice cold glass. And I love any rosé. I love Riesling. So I'm more of a white wine drinker than red wine, but I did drink some reds in research for this book, of course, for research purposes. But yeah, I think in general, probably Prosecco or like a nice drier white wine would be my go-to.
Nice. That's fun. What's something that not many people know about you?
I have an exceptional skill that I can make almost anything out of pipe cleaners. That's really random, but I think it comes with having 4 kids. And we, during COVID, we made a lot of crafts, and we got really into pipe cleaners for a while. So I was like, what do you guys want me to make? So I discovered that I have a skill for making stuff out of pipe cleaners. So it's there's lots of pipe cleaner animals in my house right now.
So instead of balloon art, you have pipe cleaner.
Yes.
You can make pipe cleaner animals. That's funny.
Yes.
I love that. That was so random, but so fun. So when did you decide that you wanted to be a writer?
I feel like I was one of those kids who's just always knew. I think I was totally that kid back in like 3rd or 4th grade who was just like filling notebooks with random stories. And it's funny to look back at some of them because my parents kept a lot of stuff, and I've got like my earliest short stories that where I wrote by hand and then my mom typed up for me. And one of them I remember I read in front of my class, and I was just really nervous because I didn't like public speaking, but it was it was about a dog. It was like a kind of a Homeward Bound ripoff, like about a dog on a journey, but it was so I feel like I always wanted to write. My mom even put it in a little duotang for me, so it looked more like a book. It was pretty cute. And I illustrated it too. It was fun. And I was always reading. Like I would always, I think, prefer to be with a book. Doing like reading would be my happy place. So I feel like I always knew I wanted to write, but actually getting there took a little bit longer. I went to school for English literature, and then I thought maybe I'd go into academia and become a professor, and then kind of realized that wasn't for me. And then I went to school for journalism and kind of learned that side of writing, like writing for news. And then I kind of realized that wasn't for me. It was sort of like I was always tiptoeing around what I actually wanted to do, which was write fiction, but I kind of dismissed it in my head as like an improbable career choice. And I think I was afraid of what people would think because, there's this stereotype, oh, you're not going to make any money, or you're just wasting your time. And, oh, barely anyone gets published. Like there's so many negative things that people could say that kind of squash your dream before it even starts. So I started writing fiction without even telling anyone, just in the crevices between day job time, and just having fun with it for the first time, and not really having huge expectations or anything, but just really wanting to create something. And finally, like I always had issues with perfectionism and not liking what I had on the page because it didn't match what was in my head. But finally, when I let go of that, I realized it was really fun. And I think that's sort of what you always have to come back to as a writer, the joy of creating it no matter what. So that's sort of how I got started. Very roundabout way, but I feel like I always knew, and writing and I found each other again. Like it was never something that left me, and I feel like I always knew, but I didn't admit it to myself until a bit later.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's nice. So how would you describe a typical day as an author?
Well, they can change because I've got 4 kids, and I feel like it's very busy, and there's days where your best plans get interrupted. You might have plans for like a nice long leisurely writing day, and then kids homesick or something. It seems like, but I try to do most of my drafting in the early morning hours, just because my brain, I don't know, does better during that time. Like when I'm up and the house is quiet and I have my coffee and I can and my emails haven't started going off, my phone is silent, I can just sort of really indulge in that quiet time and get the drafting done. So I try to write 2,000 words a day when I'm drafting something, and then I might spend the afternoon, responding to emails, or depending on what stage a book is at, working on revisions, or, working on different types of things, or blurbing for other authors. So it's a lot of more like the administrative stuff, but I really find that my creativity is the highest in the morning. So I try to kind of get all that out of the way in the morning, and then I'm kind of feel great about the rest of the day. I also kind of I don't reread as I write, but I do try to think about the next steps ahead. I don't outline either per se, but I call myself like a headlights outliner. So I kind of want to set myself up for success the next day by kind of leaving myself a couple helpful notes in the manuscript to say, like, this is kind of where the next chapter is going to go, so that I'm not staring at a blank page, which is very daunting. So, and I try to go to bed early, and read before bed a little bit, but sometimes a book will keep me up late. So I'm sure we all know the feeling.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
To jump off that, I'm curious, like, so do you, as you're going through like your writing process, do you plot out your books, or are you a person that like starts and sees kind of where it goes?
Oh man, I've both. I've tried really hard to be an outliner, and I feel like I'm not good at it because my outline always ends up changing so much. But at the same time, I used to be a full-on pantser, so I never knew anything that was going to happen before I started writing. And that worked out for me a few times really well, but then it also didn't work out. And was a spectacular failure a couple other times where I realized, like, 30,000 or more words in, like, where am I going with this? What's even happening? And then when you don't know what's happening, I feel like the momentum is totally gone. And then you find ways to procrastinate and not work on it. So I wish I was more organized, but I am sort of discovering what works for me, which is having a loose outline in place and sort of some major plot points I want to hit, or I think I want to hit. And kind of like I was saying, like the headlights outlining. Like I forget who I read an interview, and it was like somebody was saying, you just need to know as far as the next scene. And I was like, that's like, so what you're writing now kind of is lighting up what just as far ahead as you can see. So you don't need to worry about what's coming like 50 pages from now. Just worry about what's coming 5 pages from now. So I kind of resonated with that because I feel like part of the fun for me as an author is being able to surprise myself as I write, because I feel like that will hopefully surprise my reader as well. And sometimes if I'm writing an outline or writing off an outline and I'm bored, I feel like that's going to read like a big slog. Yeah, like I'm not actually excited about this. And if I'm rereading something of mine and I'm glazing over like a boring bit, I'm like, well, no one's going to want to read this if I'm bored. So, so I feel like I'm a little more chaotic than I'd like to be with my drafting. I know I have friends who do like these perfectly structured outlines and stick to them, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how? I don't know. Mine characters are just messy. They're just all over the place. They're like, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. But I think having a loose outline of where I want to go is very helpful, but also just giving myself permission to deviate if something feels more exciting and like, oh, that's cool, I could try this. And sometimes the truth is that you write yourself into corners and you end up cutting 50,000 words, and then that's on the cutting room floor, and oh well, it's sort of part of the process. But sometimes you have to write yourself into the wrong direction to figure out the right one. That's what I keep reminding myself. So not
sense.
always pretty, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I just find that so interesting.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Like I've never heard of that. Like out of all the author interviews that we've done, I've never heard one explain the whole headlight, process and stuff like that. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So do you have any interesting like writing quirks that kind of stand out?
Not really. I feel like I've kind of gotten attached to this using a purple pen when I'm making, because I use a notebook for, like I have a notebook for each book, and generally I'll do all my brainstorming in there. I've got terrible handwriting, so nobody could even read it, I'm sure, but I do all my like messy brainstorming and like my info dump and ideas and all that stuff, and I've kind of gotten attached to this particular purple pen, and so now I really like using them. I started using them while I was working on Till Death Do Us Part, and usually I have a different color pen for each POV. So that was my Bev pen for Till Death Do Us Part, and now I've sort of grown attached to having a narrator with a purple pen. And other than that, I just drink a lot of coffee. That's like my
same.
Can't work without it. I also can't function without it. So it's I kind of need to have, like, the first thing before I sit down in the morning is you got to have that pot of coffee and have those first sips, because otherwise nothing would get done.
For kids, that's another good reason for coffee.
Lots of coffee. What do you like to do when you're not writing?
Just mom stuff, I guess. Like I like to do crafts with my kids, like pipe cleaners. No. Oh, my Zoom setup just totally fell over. Hang on. Wow, that was really weird.
Okay.
So I'm here. Okay. Other than that, lots of crafts. And my husband and I really like to hike, so we will, do a lot of outdoor stuff with our kids, take them on hikes, and go to the playground and kind of we go camping in the summer and go to the beach. Lots of different adventures. Right now it's winter in Canada and it's freezing, so we just went snowshoeing on the weekend. So we're kind of outdoorsy people, I guess, and always looking for stuff to do like that. And I also love to shop and go for drinks with my girlfriends, but that doesn't happen all that often anymore since we all have, most of us have kids. Yeah, so it's hard to coordinate, but when it happens, it's always fun.
Nice. That is fun. So you said you had like you had some young adult novels and some adult novels, right? Over all of those, who would you say has been your favorite character or the most fun to write, like their perspective?
Bev, Until Death Do Us Part. Bev was a challenging one to get right. So her character, I feel like, went through a lot of iterations, and it felt very rewarding when she came together on the page. So that was just a very rewarding writing experience for me. And she was very complicated, and and also like the likability question, like you have to toe the line with characters. And I always think like you don't have to agree with everything they do. They don't have to be traditionally likable, but they do have to be relatable in some way. There's got to be something where you can see why somebody would make the decisions they make. And I guess the same can be said for my main character, Ambrosia, in Till Death Do Us Part. The girls are also nice here. She was made some bad decisions and a lot of things that were, morally very gray decisions. But hopefully, like the layers that you put into the character kind of make the reader understand why they might have done what they did, even though they don't agree with it. So I always find it interesting to write characters like that and kind of take on that challenge. And I love unlikable characters, and I love when I root for them, and then I feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I want this person to get away with it. Like when I was watching Breaking Bad, I was like, oh my God, I want him to get away with it. Like, just I find it so interesting when it's done in a way that the character is real to that extent where you can understand why, even though you would never do it yourself, or it gets kind of horrifying to think about. But I don't know, I always find that's so interesting with these characters. So when I'm reading, it's the same thing. I love reading about these characters who may not be traditionally likable on the page, especially like these like women characters when they're messy and vulnerable and complicated. So those are also my favorite to write. So yeah.
I loved Bev, like just the motherness of her, just in the complicated decisions, and I liked that part of her character.
Oh yeah. So what is your favorite thing about being an author?
Oh gosh, so many things. It's honestly my dream job. So I think just getting to make things up and like research really cool stuff. I love that part of the job. It's so cool. Like now when I'm sitting down to think about writing the next book or a future book, I always tell myself, like, what would I feel like would be really interesting to learn about, or what time period, or what place should I set it? And I feel like there's so many possibilities, and it's so exciting to think about. So I love that that's part of the job, in that I get to, always be learning interesting things that I can then kind of weave into the story. And just like making things up, creating things, it's just against like a backdrop of something that's real. I just feel like it's just, for me, it feels like magic. It's so much fun. And I love when I get into that flow state in a novel where I feel like it's finally coming together and I'm like losing myself in the book. That's just the best feeling. It's makes up for all those times where it's like you just want to throw your computer against the wall because it's not going well. There's so many days like that where it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't figure this out, what I want to say, or this isn't going the way I thought it was going to go, or this is a hot mess and I'm an imposter. There's so many days like that, but they really, like, they all melt away when you finally like crack the difficult plot point, or have that breakthrough, or get in that flow state with your writing where you can lose the time, and all of a sudden I have forgotten to eat and it's like dinner time and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know, I just disappeared into those hours. So there's a really cool feeling.
That's awesome.
And I also love being sent books by other authors and getting to read them early because it's so much fun. The fun part of the job. I just love it. I love reading. So it's always really an honor for me.
Nice. How do you treat yourself after publishing a new book?
Oh gosh. I used to have a tradition where I would buy a purse after I finished a book, but I'll usually like treat myself along the way in little rewards because I feel like that keeps me motivated. I'm one of those people who like little things will keep me going. Like, oh, I get to put a sticker on this day if I hit my word count, like little motivational things. Or I'll be like, okay, if I hit my goal by the end of the month, I'm gonna make a Sephora order and it'll be really fun, like something like that. But also I save a bottle of champagne for when I've done a book, because I feel like everything needs to be celebrated in this industry. Every draft, it's just, you got to celebrate your good news because there's enough bad news. You got to, I feel like you really have to celebrate the good news.
Nice.
So of all the books that you have published, is there one you like cherish the most or you're like the most proud of?
I feel like it's always like my most recent one because that's the one that's closest to me right now. But honestly, Till Death Do Us Part is the one I'm the most proud of because it took the longest to come together. I feel like I wrote The Girls Are Also Nice Here and it came together so quickly, and like it was just such an opposite experience with Till Death. I actually wrote a whole other book in between writing The Girls Are Also Nice Here and Till Death, and it just wasn't working. But to pour so much time and energy into something only to have to completely go back to square one was very it's just, it's disheartening because you feel like, oh my gosh, all that hard work. So it's kind of a blow to the confidence. And then you start to doubt your instincts as a writer. And it kind of feels like this hole that you have to crawl out of. And there were times, because Till Death Do Us Part took a while to come together. It had many, many, many drafts. And I feel like that process really challenged me as a writer and as a person. And, sometimes I was like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to have another book published? Or have I forgotten completely how to do this? And I think the fact that I came out of it and just kept going and kept pushing myself and stuck with it that's why I'm kind of the most proud of that book. It's the hardest fought one, I guess, of all of them. So, and really just made me, now that I got through that, I can now I've kind of just have this faith in myself. Like, yeah, that was a hot mess and I made it into a book and we can do it again. So I feel like that really taught me a lot of lessons and perseverance. So I'm forever grateful.
Nice.
Well, my next question, this is like not in there. This is back to what you had said about the book you wrote before the Till Death Do You Part that you scrapped. Was it a completely different storyline? Is it something you would ever like try and go back to, or is it just like
completely different? Yeah, completely different book, different characters, like no similarities to Till Death. So, you know what? I still love that book, like in my heart, but. So like I never say never to stuff that I shelf. And I love hearing stories about writers who like 5 years later, they're like, oh, I figured out what wasn't working. And they go in and kind of rework parts of it. So I love hearing about that because I do never say never. Like, who knows, next week or next year, whenever, I could be like, oh yeah, I finally figured out what wasn't working with that book. So I want to fix it. And maybe that'll happen and maybe not. Either way, that book was a learning experience for me, and I feel like it made me a stronger writer, even though nobody might never see it. It's just I like to think with writing that no work is wasted work, especially since most novelists, I feel like most people have a couple books in the drawer, as we call it. So I wrote 2 books before I ever got published, and those ones will definitely never see the light of day. They you know what, I wouldn't have written anything else had I not written those first. I learned so much from them. And I feel like most of my writer friends have similar stories where there's, one book or multiple books where we kind of learned from, because it's hard. Like it's you learn a lot as you're going. And I look back on those books and I'm like, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, but I learned a lot, and I had fun with it. And this is sort of the books I have now published wouldn't be out without those ones. So I like to remind myself when I'm cutting thousands of words, I'm like, no work is wasted. It all kind of, goes into the final product, even though the reader will never see it, but it's part of us, and it's sort of, it's all part of the journey.
Yeah. So kind of, you did already kind of touch on the next question, is what are some challenges you face as an author? Like obviously the writing things that don't ever get published, but is there anything else?
Yeah. Honestly, for me, it's my own perfectionism is my biggest challenge. So I'm sometimes my own biggest obstacle. I get in my head and I second guess things, or tell myself it's like I have an idea, obviously, of how I want it to look in my head, but then I'll start typing and it won't match up, and then I'll beat myself up over it. I'll be like, oh, this isn't any good. And then I'll kind of shut down and not want to go any further. So I feel like that is a tendency that I'm trying to work on. And just whenever I don't feel like writing, I kind of ask myself why and try to suss out the root of that. And if the root of that is just I'm afraid of I'm not being good enough, or that I'm not going to match what's in my head, then I kind of force myself to write through it. And I always feel better for having done it. Even if the writing that's coming out feels like crap, I'm always like, I can correct it later, but it's better than having a blank page, because that blank page is never going to get published. So you've got to, there's a motto like first drafts only have to exist. That's the only purpose they have to serve. And I remember that every time I write a first draft. So that's definitely something that I've struggled with in the past. And just, sometimes just being intimidated by that blank page, and not, wanting to get to work just because you're afraid you're not going to meet your own expectations. I think there's very valid reasons some days where I sit down and I don't want to write. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I need to refill the creative well here. I need to do a bunch of reading. And that's sort of what I've been doing this month. I've just been on a big reading binge because the holidays were so hectic, and, it's, you don't get a lot of time for that. And I kind of wanted to sit down, and I feel like reading and taking in different forms of media, like watching great movies or TV shows, and, getting out and doing other things than sitting at my computer really helped to refill the well and inspire me and make me go back feeling more balanced and more energized. So I feel like it's taken a while for me to learn those lessons, but now that I can sort of understand myself a little better, it kind of makes my writing process a little bit less chaotic.
Yeah, definitely. So this is my favorite question to ask on every single book discussion or interview, but only using 3 words. How would you describe Till Death Do Us Part?
Oh gosh, I think intense, twisty, and surprising. Hopefully.
No, those were good.
Yeah, that tracks.
I like those. Okay, so let's start talking a little bit about Till Death Do Us Part. I know we were talking a little bit about what inspired you to write it when kind of before the live, when kind of backstage, but are there any other things that you can add to kind of tell us a little bit where the book came from? What inspired you?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say what the initial seed of it was, but I know that things weren't really coming together and like gelling together until we had that vineyard setting. And as soon as that came together, it was suddenly the book was like, oh my gosh, this is what was missing. It was that like puzzle piece that had been out of place. Like originally, it's hard to even believe, like it was set in a random suburb in New York. And I was like, now looking back, I'm like, how did that even work? So, but once, like this book went through so many rewrites, it's ridiculous. It's like, it's been, I don't even know how many drafts. I should have kept track, but the characters stayed the same, but then the setting completely changed, which then changed everything in a very exciting way, because then it felt like this is where they should have been the whole time, and this is where they needed to be. So having that, and then getting to do the research about wine was so much fun, because I'm a wine lover, and it was really just fun for me to learn. And I think I wanted to write something that touched on marriage and motherhood. So those were two of the main inspirations here. And I knew I wanted a dual narration. So I didn't have a lot of things solidified in my head when I sat down to write this, which might be why it took so many drafts to get right. But I do think that what really brought everything together in a cohesive way was that vineyard setting. And that, I guess, was really the heart of the setting. Was part like I wanted it to feel like another character in the book, because that's how it felt in my head. So that once that came together, I felt like the book really took on the shape that it has now. So
yeah, I wouldn't be able to picture it not in a vineyard setting. If it had been New York, I'm like, I wouldn't have pictured it. I don't.
Right? Yeah.
So you had mentioned like the fun of like doing all the research for the story. Did you have any background in wine, and what specific like research did you do for this book?
I did not have a background in wine, just that I really liked drinking it. But I think like I did a lot of reading. I did a ton of research, like not just online, but like in different books that I bought. And it was also like interesting because it was on I started drafting this around the tail end of COVID, and it was like, it's so funny. Like, I feel like, I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but the pandemic has totally altered my time. Like, I'm like, was it 5 years ago? Was it 2 years ago? I don't know. But I know that a lot of it, like, I couldn't go and physically go to Napa and research. So I did a lot of like armchair traveling, as I call it, where I was just kind of daydreaming in these books and getting a sense of what it was going to be like. And then I did go to a couple vineyards around here. We have the Niagara region here, which is obviously different than Napa, but did a couple like wine tours just to like learn about the wine. But and by then I'd also been drafting, and it was interesting to to listen to someone talk about it who makes wine, and like it was exciting because I was like, oh yes, I got the details right. So it was a good feeling in that regard. But I did a lot of reading, and something that I do, I know every author's different, but my first drafts do not have much detail about some very important things. Like you'd think maybe the wine detail would have been at the forefront, but when I wrote my first draft of the vineyard setting of this book, which is probably like the 8th draft already, but when I wrote that first draft, I didn't have, I left a lot of blanks. I didn't have a lot of details. I put like brackets and say, insert details here, or insert setting here, winemaking here. And I went back in my second and third and whatever consecutive drafts and added a lot more. But between that first draft and the second draft, I added about 25,000 words of setting, wine, all of that stuff. And so it was a huge process. But for me, the first draft really has the goal for me with that is to keep the momentum going. And if I had tried to integrate research into the book, then it would have taken me forever, and I would have lost momentum and maybe just not even finished it. That's me though. I know everyone's different. Some people draft slowly and they sort of take their time and add the detail as they go. But for me, I need to get that momentum to get through that draft, and then I go back and do a ton of research between the first and second draft and really fill in all those blanks. And a lot of times things change entirely with what I learn, but the momentum for me when I'm drafting is key, because I gotta get that first draft down. Otherwise my procrastination sets in and my attention gets diverted. So that's sort of the way I research and the way that I weave that into my drafts. And I also just want to get those main plot points down and kind of get that sense, that momentum, that sense of like dominoes tipping over with the plot before I flesh out the setting and the different things. So I don't know if this is how I'm always going to be, but for the last couple books, it's worked well. So we'll see.
Don't change it if it's working.
Yeah, so far.
So you kind of did already answer my next question. So the story focuses on the two women, June and Bev, and is there a POV that you enjoyed writing more than the other? Which I know you said you liked Bev better. So did you enjoy writing about Bev more than June, or like that?
I love them both in different ways, and for a lot, like June's storyline is very much like the thriller engine of the book. I feel like, because she's the one who's looking back into the past, whereas Bev is trying to figure out her future. So her storyline had more of like the romance and I feel like a lot of just things that women might deal with, especially mothers. So I found that really interesting to mine through Bev. And for June, I feel like I really got to know both of them, and I got to love both of them. But Bev was a harder one to flesh out, and maybe that's why she just felt so rewarding to me to write. But I think I had fun trying to have their storylines weave together, even though they're in different decades and have totally different lives. So I found it really fun to explore sort of how the past does impact the present in so many ways, how all these decisions that people make can sort of reverberate through generations. So I think, and what I did with this story was I actually wrote them chapter by chapter. So I wrote a June chapter, I wrote a Bev chapter, I wrote them exactly as they're ordered, which is not what I did for The Girls Are Also Nice Here. I had one narrator, but two viewpoints. So with that book, I wrote the entire past tense separately and the entire present tense separately, and sort of jammed them together later on. But with Till Death, I was able to sort of hop between the two narrators' heads without getting, like, I always knew who I was, and like it was a totally different vibe. I was never like, oh, whose section am I in? So it felt for me like, maybe because the plot had so many twists and turns that I couldn't write them separately and try to fuse them together, because it was just going to be too hard to keep track of what happened when. And I kind of needed, okay, what happens in this past chapter is going to feed into what happens with what June is doing in the present. So I kind of played around with that with this book, and it seemed to work out well. But yeah, I would say that I feel like June came together quicker for me, and Bev definitely took harder and was harder and more revisions to get right. But I feel like when you work really hard at something and then see it come together is just a really rewarding feeling.
Yeah,
I agree. That's cool. And I know we've talked kind of about plot and the fact that you like outlining. Did you have like an end in mind? Like, because I always wonder that about authors. Like, did you know where you were going the whole time and it just kind of twisted and turned to get there? Or I think I kind of already asked this, but I still am very curious.
I wish I had known the ending before I started writing it, because the ending, it changed like between, it changed a lot. I don't even remember how it ended originally. It was so many drafts ago, but yeah. I know the first vineyard setting draft ended in a totally different way. And I didn't even know like who the person behind everything was until like a few drafts in, and then it finally gelled. It was just, it's so funny to talk about, because I'm like, yeah, it sounds so weird, but sometimes I don't know, like until like I'm like, who is behind all this? Like, and I had the same experience with The Girls Are Also Nice Here. I didn't know, so it was but then it's interesting because you go back and it's like you pick up the little seeds that you've left for yourself, and it's like, oh, my subconscious knew the whole time, but I didn't. Like, I knew, but I didn't know. So, and I feel like that's so interesting to me. And I've heard other writers talk about this too, and I find it fascinating. It's like our brains are trying to tell us something this whole time. Sometimes it takes longer for us to actually listen, but yeah, I feel like I sat down with a totally different ending, and it changed a lot. But in general, I like to sort of have an idea of how things are going to end, but they rarely actually go that way for me. I feel like my brain likes to conjure up different scenarios, which I honestly think is fun. I trust my instincts, and if something feels boring, even if it's in like, or that's where I thought it was going to go and it doesn't feel right anymore, I'll like totally lean into that and be like, okay, let's go in a different direction and see where it goes, because that, I think you do have to trust your instincts. And again, if it's feeling boring or like a slog, it's really indicative, I think, of how it's going to read later to somebody else. I'm like, I don't want to subject a reader to this slog, so well, have to play around with that. Get something better. Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah, you trust me. You do not want to read those earlier drafts. They are a mess.
I mean, we might. So the book not only deals with the mystery of what happened to June's husband, but also touched on a lot of tough family issues. So what is something that you would want your audience, your readers, to take away from that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that nothing is set in stone. Like, and you don't, like, people have second chances in their lives, and they have chances to do things differently. And I think that's something that both women in this story learn, without giving away any spoilers. But I think that's a way in which their lives parallel each other, even in totally different decades, is that, just because you think you have this you only get one great love in your life, I don't think that's true. So I think that's something that both of these women kind of learn, and that they both have different choices they can make. And just because you've made a choice doesn't mean you can't make a different one. And I think that's something that a lot of people could hopefully resonate with, in terms of, family, career, whatever. So I'm hoping that that's something that that people can take away.
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. And then lastly, my last question, if you're able to share, do you have any upcoming plans or projects that you can share with us?
Nothing I could share yet, but I'm working on something new, and I'm really, really, really excited about it. So it's interesting because everyone says, like, your second novel is the worst one to write, and and it's true though, because my second young adult novel was probably my hardest to write, and then Till Death Do Us Part was my second adult novel, and it was a total beast to write. So that third novel was a bit of an easier process for me. And it's interesting because I did try to use an outline, and I did veer off. So it's the same type of thing, but I feel like in trying to know what happens, I am helping myself subconsciously. And something I also did is, because Till Death took so long to come together, I'm always thinking about other projects in the back of my head, or in my notes app on my phone, or in my messy notebooks, just where I'm letting things marinate for future books. And in this case, I had these characters and their stories marinating for so long that that helped me when I sat down to write. It helped me immensely because I felt like I knew them already, and there's already a lot of depth of them in the sketches I'd done in my books, or the notes I'd taken in my app. And I think it's easy to fall into the trap as a writer, like you're only productive if you're sitting at your keyboard typing. I don't think that's true. I think thinking can be just as productive and as anything that you put out on your keyboard. So you might think, oh, I didn't have a productive day because I stared into space, but all that letting things marinate and kind of thinking on your characters. When I sat down to write, I felt like I already knew these people. So that's sort of what I'm trying to take into future projects now, and be like, okay, I don't need to like just rush to the page right away. I feel like there's so much pressure to just get the next thing going, but I'm trying to take a little more time because it will save me time in the long run. It made drafting so much easier instead of showing up with like a very half-formed notion of a character where I didn't know much about them. So now I'm sort of trying to start at a point where I feel like I know the characters and can kind of, when I know them, I can let them guide the story, and they kind of tell me where they need to go. So I don't know. That's sort of where I'm at right now. But I'm very excited, and hopefully I'll get to talk about my next project soon.
Yeah. Well, we're
excited
happy
for
to
it.
hear that there's something in the works.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all the questions that we have compiled together. Thank you so much for, spending the past almost hour with us and letting us get to know you and your writing process and everything with this book. We really appreciate it. And we're so looking forward to discussing it live with every book club member on Monday.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And these were such great questions. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll go ahead and end the stream here. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you so much.